everybody. Hello. Hi. How are we all doing? It's the end of the day. I know there's a lot going on. Is everybody's brain full? Yeah, mine is too. But I promise I will try to keep this entertaining, and all of my slides are already posted on SlideShare, so if you want to take pictures or write notes, cool, but if you just want to look this all up later, that is also fine. So my name is Amanda Stockwell, and despite my name sounding very British, you might be able to tell from my accent that I've come from very far away to be here with you today. So I'm from the United States, but I'm so excited to be here. I just want to get this out of the way. I'm sorry for our president. If anyone would like a house guest for the next 2 or so years, let's talk later. And I am here to talk about adjusting UX research in an Agile world. So before I get too far into this, I just kind of want to get a sense for what everybody already knows about user experience and research. So just out of curiosity, who in the room considers themselves a UX professional of some kind or another? Yeah, okay. How about developers? Okay. How about product people? Okay. Scrum masters? Okay. Who have I missed? Yeah, okay. All right, well, and can I assume that you all know a fair bit about Agile? Right? Okay, so you know that it fixes everything. Yay, Agile. It is the duct tape of the software development world. And Agile is really great for a lot of things, but not for everything. And specifically, UX research has some real challenges when it comes to Agile. So Agile's real big pushes are to not spend so much time on documenting, to deliver working code, and to really focus on kind of adapting to things. But here's the problem. With UX research, you're outputting learning, right? Like my goal is to learn stuff. You don't necessarily need to build anything to learn something. So sometimes it's really hard to prioritize UX research because you can't measure my learning in lines of code that I wrote. If I have it my way, I won't write another line of code ever in my whole life. The other thing is that in kind of traditional waterfall, there's really dedicated upfront time to doing discovery research often. And in Agile, there's typically not dedicated time. Sometimes you work it in, but a lot of times what I've seen happen is that no dedicated time means just no time at all. There is always another priority, always something that takes precedence. And without kind of blocking it off, I kind of like to think of this as like exercise, right? Like unless it's blocked off in my calendar and I know exactly when I'm going to do it, I'm probably going to find a reason not to. And the other thing is that UX is meant to be a team sport. Agile is really focused on cross-functional teams, but here's what I see happen a lot. UX teams, or UX people, is made up of a bunch of different disciplines, right? So there could be a whole team of UX people that all have kind of their own specialty, but very often on cross-functional teams, there is one person who is the UX person, if you're lucky, right? And the UX person, this, if you can't see it very well, you don't need to see all the details, but what you can kind of get is that there's a whole bunch of related disciplines that make up kind of the area of user experience. And it is really incredibly difficult for any one person to be experienced at, good at, and like all of those things. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So with all of that said, there's some definite challenges. And I'm a consultant, which means that I work with lots of different clients of lots of different kinds. And it also means that I get to peek inside a little bit about how different teams solve for this and how kind of some things that we can all pull on to hopefully kind of help ourselves. But first, I have a great big secret. I promised dog pictures. This is my dog, Brimmer. I have a great big secret, which is that there is no right way to do Agile. Every team is a little bit different. Every group is going to have something that works a little bit differently for them. So the next bunch of stuff I'm going to share is ideas that I've seen work in bunches of different companies of bunches of different sizes and structures and kind of focus. But take all of it with a grain of salt and plan on experimenting for yourself because it's all going to depend on what you're trying to get done and where you're at. So I'll start there. We are all special snowflakes. enjoy. All right, but I do have some specific kind of suggestions around how to set up yourself, your team, and your practice to kind of encourage UX research to happen. So the first, I'm so sorry. I made this slide a little while ago. Sorry about last night. Is team makeup. So one question I get asked all the time is, and I don't want to open this as a debate because it could and is another topic, is should a UX designer code? Shoot me. Maybe. But well, the point that I really want to make is that cross-functionality isn't just for developers or different sort of developer teams. So if you'll notice, it's a little bit small, but so I have on my kind of theoretical ideal cross-functional team, I have a UX designer, and I also have a UX researcher, along with a back-end dev, a front-end dev, another back-end dev that apparently I spelled differently, and a QA tester. That's what happens when you work on slides on planes and trains and automobiles. So one thing that I always really like to recommend to people, if at all possible, is embed a UX person on every cross-functional team. Ideally, one person who focuses more on the design end of things and another person who focuses more on the research end of things. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, remember that big map of stuff that is kind of under the bucket of UX? That's a huge amount of discipline and a huge amount of knowledge. And very frequently, someone might say that they are good at all that stuff, and they even might be. But it's really difficult to find someone who truly is good at all of those different things, has the breadth of experience you need to kind of assume all of those different roles. And more importantly, it is really, really not recommended to test your own work or to be the one who is, for instance, when you're doing validation work, if you created the thing, you probably shouldn't be the one testing it because you won't be able to help it. You will be biased. And I'll talk about that again, too. So here's the problem. How many of you work in a company or an organization where you have the funding for a full-time UX researcher for every cross-functional team? Yep, didn't think so. If you do, let me know, because I would like to talk. But more likely, what you're going to have is a bunch of different cross-functional development teams and maybe a smaller research team. Maybe it's one, maybe it's two. This is not as good because the researcher can't get as fully focused on any one product area. They can't get to know things as well, and you can't develop as close relationships. Plus, just the overhead of being one or two researchers who are serving 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 teams, it can be rough, but it's better to have some research resources than none at all. But how many of you work in an organization that has any dedicated UX research resources? Okay, a few more of you, but still not in the majority. So more likely what I see is something like this. And you'll notice that no longer is that UX designer a designer. They're what is known as a UX-icorn, or a UX unicorn, where they do dabble in a little bit of everything. And this can totally work. However, I have a giant suggestion, which is that you have UX-icorn 1 and UX-icorn 2 swap with each other and help each other test out, especially when you're doing validation work. Partner on research efforts so that they are not researching their own things and validating their own ideas. Because here is what happens, and I am not the first one to mention this today, but if you are the one who designed something and you are running usability sessions or interviews or whatever, even if you don't mean to, and even if you went to the talk earlier about how to craft questions right, and even if you're really experienced, a lot of the time it's going to look something like this. How much do you love this thing that I made? Isn't it awesome? So because of that, I recommend that you switch and work with a partner researcher on a different cross-functional team. If you don't have resources for even any UX design at all, I say quit. I don't know. No, not really, but work to make one of these other people, turn them into a UX-icorn of sorts, and we'll talk about that more as well, too. Okay, so now that the team makeup is out of the way, and another thing I wanted to point out, so I often also get asked the question of, okay, I feel like we need UX research resources, but how do I convince other people that we do? And the very best way that I have seen to do that, Becky actually mentioned that this morning, is just get some way to get a usability test or user research done of some kind, and show everybody else how very painful it is to interact with your product. There is nothing quite like a grimace of frustration to help change minds and change budgets. If you find me later at the beach, I will tell you the story about how a single customer helped my previous company change the backlog for like 2 years at my old company, because she cried on screen and we captured it. It was awful, but amazing. All right, next, on to setup and logistics. So another thing that I hear all the time is, like in UX research or in Agile, we're moving so fast we just don't have time to do any research, right? No, that's bullshit. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear here, but do it. Okay, so the very number one thing that I can recommend to every team is to, if you use sprints, do that, but even if you don't use sprints, make research a regular part of the schedule. So whatever team meetings and functions you already have, like sprint planning and retrospectives and whatever, add research to the schedule, whatever that is. So at one company, they use 2-week sprints, so every other Thursday is always research day. Doesn't matter what's going on, doesn't matter who's around, it is in the schedule. And the kind of more important part to that is to hold it sacred. No, we cannot have a team lunch that day. No, don't schedule a doctor's appointment. No, don't plan to be out if you can help it. Putting it on the schedule makes everyone aware of it. It holds you and the team accountable for doing it, and it makes it seem more important and more visible to the people who don't already value UX research. But don't lose sight of the big picture. So it is very easy, especially when you work in sprint cycles, to have tiny little rotations of iterative testing of, I had this idea, let's validate it. I had this idea, let's validate it. This thing is going on. But here's what can happen. You can do tiny little cycles of iteration, and then you have this Mod Podge awful thing that is one isolated good idea at a time, but all together doesn't work all that well. And the other thing is that needs change. The world is changing faster than ever, and what was important to me 5 years ago is not as important to me as it was 2 years ago. It's probably not at all important to me today. So making sure that you do both short-term validation type work and bigger term evaluative and generative work to see how everything is fitting together and continuing to discover needs as they change, rather than doing tiny little iterations of research on needs that you discovered 3 years ago, because chances are that they're not quite the same anymore. This is my very favorite UX hack of all time. This is a tool called Powwow. You set up, it's very much like Calendly. There's a couple of other similar ones, but this is my favorite. You set up time on a calendar, and then people can schedule themselves. And then you never have to talk to them until it's time for the research. And that seems like such a little thing, but very often, especially if you're running some sort of research every 2 weeks or so, getting rid of the logistics of having people schedule themselves, it saves so much time, and it removes the barrier of going back and forth and trying to schedule things. And associated with that, I really recommend making your own panel of something. So how many of you work on a product or a solution or something that already exists in the world and already has users? Okay, a handful of you. And how many of you work on something that doesn't require extremely specific, sensitive knowledge? You all work on extremely sensitive knowledge? Kind of, sort of? Okay. My point being that if you have existing users, you can reach out to them in the ways that you already talk to them. Or if you work internally on products, that's even easier, because you can walk over to their desk or send out to the group email. If you have something like a CRM like Salesforce, cool, use that. If you don't, you can use something as simple as a spreadsheet. And give yourself a way to easily reach out to people. This is a blurred out version of one that I use for one of my clients. It has just their general contact information, their name, their email, and their phone. That group had persona types, so when we had included them, when we invited them, basically we sent them a little screener, which would help us identify them into what kind of persona we thought they were, as kind of a best guess. We had some notes about when we'd contacted them last, and then some other notes just about Actually, this is the participant that really just wanted to complain the whole time, and they won't really give you feedback, so maybe don't contact them again. Or this is the participant who never actually shows up. They keep signing up, and then they never come, so don't contact them again. But my point is that whatever channel that you already communicate with, social media channels, one of my favorites actually is if people contact your support team for help with something, you can ask them if they would like to give feedback when you're working on new versions of that thing. That both is really convenient for you, and it helps them feel like they're being listened to, and it often helps de-escalate things that can make people angry. So, highly recommend making your own panel. All right, next, onto the research planning. So the other feedback that I get a lot when talking about UX research with Agile teams is they're like, yeah, but research takes a really long time. You need like at least 2 weeks just to recruit, and then another 3 weeks to run the study, and then 2 weeks to analyze, and by then we'll already have like implemented 4 sprints worth of stuff. So let me give you some tips to kind of narrow it down. And as a side note, I'm not going to go deep into the details of different types of UX research methods, but if you have questions about any of this, you can come find me, and I can send you some resources. The first thing that I like to do is borrowed from Lean UX and Lean Startup, which is write a hypothesis, and a really specific one at that. So if you're running, say, a usability test or an interview, you can kind of use this general format. If we do something, provide something, make something, then these people, which are the personas that you have theoretically targeted, will do something you want them to, and we'll know this when some sort of actionable metric. And the we'll know this when part is really important because it helps you kind of frame how you're going to figure out how to learn that thing, right? So if what you need to measure is clicks, then maybe you'll do an A/B test. If what you need to measure is understanding, that's harder to measure, but you can gather that information differently. If you have like numbers you can tie to this, that's great. But in that quick cycle that I recommend, you often don't. So sometimes you have to make a best guess. But the idea is to do the thinking up front about what you think you're looking for and what you think you know already, so that you can determine if that's true or not. And a pro tip is that the more specific your hypothesis, the easier it will be to plan the research, and more importantly, the easier it will be to come to conclusions when you're analyzing data after the fact. The next, use Franken methods. So another thing that lots of sort of traditional UX researchers do is say, well, it's not rigorous enough. It's not academic enough. We only included 5 participants or 30 survey respondents or whatever. And if you're going to be doing some sort of research every 2 weeks, that's okay. You can relax a little bit. So look for ways to take the research methods you already know and shift them around a little bit. Maybe you can conduct less sessions. Maybe you can do them unmoderated instead of moderating them. Maybe you can partner with the support team and have the support team gather some of the data for you. There's always a way to find information, and you don't have to be precious about your research method in order to learn something. However, you do want to balance the rigor with the flexibility. So for instance, if you're going to do unmoderated sessions, perhaps conduct more of them. Or find some way to balance it out, because one of the other problems with UX research and Agile is that sometimes a little bit of information is more dangerous than no information, right? So I think I'm probably like approximately the 12th person to say that today, and that wasn't planned. But sometimes your gut instinct is pretty spot on, and sometimes the information you know is okay. And if you do one round of testing and it tells you something that goes against all of the other information you have, you don't have to stick with that. Which leads me to my next point, which is, when in doubt, recycle. So if you're doing a study every 2 weeks, it might seem like impossible to come up with new content or a new piece of a prototype or something new live to test. And one thing that I really like to recommend people do is rerun the same study that you have previously done. That helps you establish a baseline, right? So you can see if anything's changed in the way that people respond. It can help you be more confident about your results. Like if you did a usability test with 5 participants one sprint, and you were kind of not sure about how things were going, and you do it again with 5 more participants and you get the exact same results, then it gives you more of a cue, gives you some more data to work off of. And it also makes your job really easy because you don't have to do any planning. You don't have to think about it. You already have all the stuff. You can reuse the script. You can reuse everything. And it takes away the sort of excuse that research is too hard to conduct. This is an important one. Share the load. So how many of you in this room have ever been involved in a research study of some kind, like actually conducting it? Oh, good. That's more than I thought. Okay, very often what ends up happening is that there's one lone UX person in a sea of developers, and none of the developers have ever been to or know about or seen a usability test or any other kind of research. And one of the things that I love about Agile is the focus on collaboration and sharing tasks. And one of the very best ways that A, you can make it actually happen, B, you can get the team to really understand what's going on with the research, and C, you can really actually get everybody to understand and empathize the users and make better decisions over time, is to have everyone involved. So it doesn't mean that a developer has to be leading an interview, but maybe they could be taking the notes. Maybe if you're hosting in-person sessions, the Scrum Master can be the one greeting people, and that kind of thing. I can't stress enough how much I recommend spreading out the research outside of just people who are theoretically supposed to be doing the UX research. So it's not everyone's job to make designs or to write scripts or to necessarily analyze the data, but it is everybody's job to make good stuff. And one of the best ways that you can make good stuff is to understand who you're making it for and how well that's doing. Another pro tip, bribe people if you need to. So I used to work at a very, very large company with very, very many stakeholders who would always claim that they were too busy to come to usability sessions. But I would make banana bread and half bake it at home and finish baking it in a toaster oven that I put in our observation room. It smelled delightful. And nobody ever missed a day. Weird. Banana bread might not work for everybody. I have also provided beer, pizza, and scotch. Whatever works for you and your team. My point is that I don't really care why you're in the room, because once you're in the room and seeing what's going on, after the first time that people came, very often they didn't need banana bread the second or the third time to show up. Because once people get the hang of it, they kind of realize that it's important for them to see, but it's very often getting people into the room in the first place that can be tough. So use what you need to. All right, data analysis and integration. So this is another one that is kind of tough, because here's the thing, it doesn't really matter how much research you do if you never do anything with the results, right? And although theoretically Agile is designed so that you can respond to needs as they arise, that's not usually really true, right? Like usually you have at least a couple of sprints planned out, at least in every organization I've ever worked with. There's always been at least some idea of what was coming next, and it's always been kind of a struggle to actually integrate research analysis and findings and get people to take a pause and be like, oh, yeah, we need to do something with that information. So there's a couple of things that I can recommend here. This one is a follow-up of the point of getting everyone involved in the research, is that if you include everyone in the research, you can also include everyone in the analysis. So this is a little chart that was popularized by a guy named Tomer Sharon. You should check him out. He's really smart, and I can share his book with you. But basically what this is a little spreadsheet that everybody shares, and as they're taking notes, as they're watching the sessions, everybody takes notes. And so the A column is stuff that people see, like observations that people have. And then on the right is like the P1, P2, those are the different participants, and if you notice that in a different participant, you just fill it in. That way you have one document, and you can manipulate this however you need to for your particular team or kind of research or whatever, but the point is getting everybody to take notes. For one, it gives somebody something to do so that they don't just sit there and eat bread while they're observing the sessions. Two, it's logistically easier for the person conducting the research if someone else is taking the notes. You're better able to respond to people and lead conversations. But also, everybody feels like they had a part in it, right? When there's one client that I'm thinking of, there was one developer who, has anyone here seen Silicon Valley, that TV show? Okay, Guilfoyle, I work with him, basically. He was not a fan of me when I first started, and he was like, you were useless, and you don't know how to code, GTFO. And then he, yes, get the out. Then he got bribed into coming into one of my sessions. He might have been the Scotch recipient. And he was like, oh, well, I just noticed this thing that like nobody else noticed. Why didn't anybody write that down? And I was like, because you had to be here. You're the only one with that knowledge. And he was like, oh, you're right. I am important. I'm coming every time. And I was like, yes. So here's the thing, and that's actually a really good point. Another way to kind of invite the team to come is that everybody has a different perspective and different information that's useful as they're looking at results. So what I recognize is the person who is running the sessions versus what a visual designer who is a person maybe who made the prototype I was talking about versus the product person who's more in tune with the business side. Everybody has a different perspective, and the things that that person knows, they're the only one. You're always the only one who knows exactly what you know. And so if you can tap into that and let everybody know how important it is that you have their feedback on things, that's super helpful. And to that note, when you're analyzing the data, if you have a specific targeted hypothesis, it's relatively easy to analyze things and talk about it as a group. So if you have a hypothesis, say you're working on an e-commerce project and you introduce something new and you say, I hypothesize that if we put this new product in this category, that at least 8 of the 10 participants will be able to find it. Well, either 8 of 10 found it or more, or they didn't. And then your analysis is, can I count to 8 or not? Hopefully, yes. And so if you find that, yes, indeed, 8 people found it, or maybe even 9 or 10 people found it, cool, stay the course. Move on to the next thing. If you're familiar at all with lean startup, this is sort of the persevere path, right? You had a hypothesis, it worked out, great, move on. Or, shit, no one found it. So you need to do something different. You need to pivot. And pivots can look like lots of different things, and again, that is a different talk. And so sometimes the next path is really clear. So again, in that example, let's say that you had put a pair of baseball cleats into the shoe category, but everybody went to baseball. Okay, well, if that's the case, then you can probably try another round with putting that item in the baseball category, and you're probably in good shape. But sometimes the results of a test, especially one that you've managed to design, analyze, run in 2 weeks, or however short your time is a little less clear. Sometimes you don't know what the best next step is. And this is the point at which I recommend, maybe run another version of the test, either the exact same test or take that idea and see if you can test it in another way. So if you were, say, doing a usability test with the categories, maybe you can try a card sort or tree test. Find a complementary method that can help you try to find the information. But it's okay not to know things, and it's way better to figure out that you're not sure before you've spent a bunch of time investing in building something out. Also, importantly, when you get to that point where you need to find new solutions, I super recommend doing that together as a team. So something that I like to do is right after the Thursday day of testing, whatever that looks like, is a team debrief. And it usually includes a little bit of brainstorming for what the next steps are. Sometimes the next steps are like, okay, that's good, we're just gonna move on to the next thing, and the meeting ends really early, and everyone's happy. Sometimes it's we're all confused. No one's exactly sure what the next step is. But when you try to come up with new solutions with everyone in the room, you never have the surprise of, oh, actually we can't build that thing. Or we could build that thing, but it's going to take us, like this amount of effort. Or you don't get the sort of surprise from any direction, technical, feasible, usable. The other thing is that it helps build in buy-in from the beginning. So again, that Guilfoyle guy, he likes feeling important. So when he has ideas in these brainstorming debrief sessions, I'm like, yes, Guilfoyle, you sketched something. You are responsible for how awesome this is. And guess what? He comes back now to those meetings. I don't even have to get him drunk anymore. Sometimes I do, but finding solutions together is one of the best benefits of Agile, right? It's one of the most awesome things about it, that there's a focus on cross-functional collaboration. And taking advantage of that, I have always seen it end up with a happier team and a better product. So as best as you can, I would recommend that. And then just a couple final things. Although I don't like to focus on documentation and nobody likes this stuff, it's just true that not everybody can be in the room all the time, and you're going to have to find ways to keep people in the loop, and also find ways to have just a little bit of documentation for posterity's sake. So this is a real example of something I've done. The first is an email. It should take you no more than like 8 to 10 minutes to write. All it really says is, hey everyone, here's the test we just ran. Here are the key takeaways. Here's what we need to do next. Let me know if you've got questions. And then I take like 3 more minutes and I copy and paste that stuff from the email into a spreadsheet. If you've got a wiki or whatever you use to document things, it doesn't really matter, but I'm prone to spreadsheets. I just say like what sprint or kind of what the timeline was, what we actually did, what we found, some notes if there's like a link to a prototype, or if there's images or videos or recordings of the sessions, and then whoever the point person was. So I'm not always around everywhere. There's only one of me, and same is true for all of you. You won't ever always be the only person heading something up. This also means that in 6 months, if someone has a question about that thing, they can come back to it and go, oh, Christy is the one who ran the card sort of the initial proposed structure. I'll ask her about that, rather than doing the runaround of asking who. So it's a little bit of documentation, but it's super helpful in the long run, and it gives everybody a chance to kind of go in and look at it in one central place. And add UX stuff to the backlog. I know that this is a controversial point at some places, but if the UX stuff is in the backlog, it will get seen. It won't be in its own separate backlog. It won't be prioritized separately. It will be prioritized together with everything else. And it's really helpful, especially to encourage that whole team to participate in things when it is prioritized just like everything else. This also I have found is really helpful to be able to actually get the implementation of stuff as it changes and the iterations. So if it's in a separate UX backlog, it can kind of go in that dark place of nowhereness and get lost, right? People will be like, oh yeah, we should improve that eventually, maybe someday. But if you're looking at all of the chunk of work in one place, then you can weigh it evenly against other things. So I super recommend that. I know that that sometimes takes a bit of convincing, but I have always found that to be great. And what I really want to leave you all with is that there's really never an excuse to not be learning. So always be learning. And now it's cocktail time. Cool. And I purposely left a lot of time for questions and maybe sneaking out early. So if anyone has questions, please shout out. Yeah?
How do you balance involving engineers and other non-UX types in the research versus the general Agile principle of leaving those developers alone so they can stay out of meetings and code?
Yeah. Here's the thing. I'm never going to be able to convince them to come all the time, But my argument is that you'll be able to code better and do better things if you invest a little bit of time in helping me with this. I also play into we committed as a team to do this thing as a team. And if I have to do this thing on my own, it won't be done as well as if everybody does it together. So I'm realistic about the fact that my whole dev team isn't going to stop all of what they're doing for an entire day and watch sessions. What is more realistic is that we have a day of sessions scheduled, and that about one dev out of a 7 or 8 person team per session or so will end up showing up. The other thing that we often do, or that I often do with different teams, is to record the sessions in some way, shape, or form, so that people can look at them later, even if they can't be there live. But it is a hard balance. That's where the bribery comes in. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Hey.
Do you feel like it's quite easy to, I suppose, I don't know if the right word is like quantify the value of those sessions to the team? So like to say, this is the value we were able to add because we have those sessions.
Yeah, so it's hard to quantify, like numerically, but it is, well, it's a couple of things. One is that nothing can change the mind quite like, so that tier story I was talking about, I'll give the 5-minute version. I was working on an email marketing product, which at the time was new and cool. That's not interesting anymore, but it was a decade ago. And we didn't have autosave, because that wasn't a sexy, cool feature. Nobody had requested it, and nobody cared. But we were doing some usability testing, completely unrelated. We were working on a new WYSIWYG editor. And most of our customers were small businesses. And so we visited a small business on site. She owned a cookie store. And the task that we gave her was basically recreate this flyer that you made in an email form so you can send it to your list, which again at the time was a big deal. Now that's not hard, but, and she worked on it for almost an hour. A customer came in and she, checked them out and had clicked out of the screen, and she had lost all of the work that she had done. And she cried a little bit. And so we took a screenshot of the tear running down her face, we had her permission. But all of the developers who worked on that thing were like, oh my God, we need autosave now. And all of the product team and all of the higher level stakeholders, after we told that story, were like, yeah, we can't make people cry, we need to do autosave. So sometimes it's about showing the pain. A lot of times I try to connect to the emotional piece of it. When I can, I do connect into financial information. So for instance, if, I'm trying to think of a good example where I can share data. For example, if you're working on an e-commerce is an easy one to give examples from, because there's usually a close tie between work that you did and money that you make or don't make. If you work on a feature that is, projected to make X amount of dollars, and you can show that you make it happen X% more often by making it easier, then you can tie that to average order size went up X%, or average additional things in the basket went up X%. When you can tie it to numbers, that's great, because especially a lot of stakeholders and business, everybody likes saying, hey, I'm gonna make you more money. Nobody ever really argues with that, but it's not always that cut and dry. So a lot of it has to do with building trust with the rest of the team and getting them to see you as valuable, and also showing them that you value what they do and that it's important to everybody. The whole thing gets better if we all do this together. That's where I've had the most success with it. Yeah. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you so much. If you do have any more questions, I'm around until Saturday. So, thanks, y'all. More dog pictures.